The Mazda MX-5 has always been a darling of the automotive industry. The journalists, the magazines, they love this thing. But from an outsider's perspective, it seems a little difficult to love. It's only got a 2-litre 4-cylinder that's naturally aspirated. It costs $45,000, and you can only get 2 people and maybe a couple of drinks in the inside. So what's to love about it? I apologize for interrupting myself, but that idiot has no idea what he's talking about, because this car is absolutely incredible. And to find out why, all of that's coming up on The Drive Guide. Although this car only has 155 horsepower, it only has to move around 2,500 pounds, so the horsepowers don't have to work so much to put the power to the ground. The gearbox itself is it's perfect. Let's move on. Let's go on to the steering. It is an electric power assist steering, which, if you were to complain of it being a bad steering rack because it's electric, then you've got no idea what you're talking about, because this car, you can feel so much of the road. You can understand where it's lost its grip, and it sounds pretty good too. You can really step on these Brembo brakes as well. You can really trust them. These Recaro seats are part of the Sport package, which, if you're planning to get this car, you absolutely have to have these seats. They fit me perfectly, and they're supportive without being rigid. All right, so we're on the highway now, and the first thing that stands out to me is that we're currently doing the speed limit, 110 kilometers an hour, but the engine is revving at around 2,900, 3,000 RPM. So the engine definitely has to rev to keep the car at this speed, which is something that took me by a bit of surprise, actually. Other things that stand out, we do have the roof up, obviously, but there is still a fair amount of wind noise. I'm hearing the wind flow just right around here. It's not as isolated and as refined as I think it wants to be. All 6'4" of me does fit, but only just. It really depends on how I've done my hair that day. Naturally, I lean a little forward, so as I am, I'm not touching the roof. But if I want to put my head back, it gives me the sensation of what I imagine it would be like to be buried alive. The design of the MX-5. The exterior, for me, I love it. I love the way the front looks, but the back end to me still looks a little out of place. It doesn't look like those two designs match up, but living with it in the past few days that I have, I love how wide the hips are and how low to the ground it is. It has the true sports car proportions. Even though I love red for Mazdas, I wouldn't get this RF in red. And the reason I say that is that when you have a light colored car, or a bright colored car I should say, it can add a lot of visual weight to the car. So with the added roof line being in red, it makes the car look taller than it actually is. The Mazda Connect infotainment system, it's available on all their models right now, and it all works the exact same way. You've all got the same dedicated shortcut buttons down here, and then the touch screen that locks you out when you're driving along. And I love it because it's clean, it's logical, and it's pretty straightforward. If you want a more in-depth review of the infotainment system, let me know by hitting that thumbs up button down below. The camera shaking around a little bit is certainly an indication that this isn't the smoothest car ever built. I think it's now time to get off the highway, put the roof back down, and go for a cruise in town. With the RF, you can do it when you're driving along under 10 kilometers an hour, but really you might as well just pull over on the side of the road, because it's a bit of a nightmare trying to keep the speed under 10 kilometers an hour and still focusing on the road. Driving this car in town, you really notice how small and nimble it is. But when I first got this car, I thought that with these buttresses behind me, I thought it would give me the impression of what it'd be like to be driving blind. But because the car is so compact, you can very easily see every corner. So parallel parking is no issue, so you can see the edge of it. And because you have a blind spot monitoring system, you can detect when somebody is in a space that you might not be able to see. When I was driving this car the other day, something happened to me that I've never experienced in a car before. And that was that people were looking at it. I have been in cars that have much higher marks and a lot more presence than this car, but I've never noticed anybody looking at them. And when I was driving this car the other day, people were giving me thumbs up, they were smiling, like nodding their heads. One truck even blitzed past me, braked, came back alongside just so they could have a good look at it, and then two big hairy-chested men gave me a thumbs up in approval. Driving it brings me joy, and I think it brings joy to everybody else in the world. Like I was saying, people giving me thumbs up and smiling. If you were to give an MX-5 to everybody in the world, I don't think we'd ever suffer a world war ever again. Let's pull over so I can point out some of the issues I have with the MX-5. No sports car is entirely practical. That's kind of what makes a sports car a sports car. And that rule certainly rings true here with the MX-5. In terms of the driving position, for me, there really isn't any adjustability for it. I'm 6'4", the seat had to go all the way back, and that's kind of my limited options. Other things to note in terms of practicality with the MX-5 is that, for one, it doesn't have a glove box. Instead, it has a little central compartment here where you can store some things, a tiny little space where you can store some sunglasses, and then behind this seat here, there's also a little hidden compartment to maybe put behind your wallet. But that's really kind of it. You do have a little bit of customization with these cup holders here, as they are removable. You can slide them down here, or you can just take them out of the car entirely. Although one thing that really strikes me as odd with this car, why does it have heated seats? I mean, this is probably only going to be someone's summer car, and you don't really need heated seats. And for me, the whole point of the MX-5 is to make a car as simple and as light as possible. So why is it that they've added this in when it creates an extra 123 pounds of mass to lug around and makes the car a little more complicated? For me, if it was my money, I would be going for the soft top model, as it is a little bit cheaper and a little simpler. But I do think you would have to be a racing car driver or have a lot of time behind the hardtop and the soft top model to try and feel a difference. Mazda claims though, however, that with the extra weight, it doesn't affect the fuel economy and it doesn't affect the performance of the MX-5. So as I was saying earlier about the practicality of the interior of the MX-5 and not having a glove box, that means that you can't store the owner's manual inside the car. Instead, you have to resort to putting it in the trunk. And before I open up the trunk, it's important to note that you don't have an exterior release. There is no way to open the boot from outside the car. You have to either resort to the key or a button on the inside. So then when we open up the trunk of the MX-5, we'll soon discover that there is enough space to put the manuals and the tire inflation kit, as this car does not have a spare. But you do have 127 litres of cargo capacity, which is 3 less than the soft top. But crucially, this boot space does not change depending on if the roof is up or if it's down. So this concludes my review of the Mazda MX-5 RF, and quite simply, I adore this car. Yes, it's got its issues. It's quite noisy on the highway. It's definitely not the most practical car ever built, but those issues pale in insignificance every time you take this car for a drive. And as a result of that, I think you'd be mad to overlook one of these cars. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you can like, share and subscribe, and I hope to see you again on The Drive Guide.